Hi, welcome to Yes She Can's Journalism Workshop. Today we will be talking to Professor Dino Chiecchi about a truth in a time of crisis. Hope you enjoy.
We'll talk about what I have called, and with apologies to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, a truth in the time of COVID-19. So I've got a little slideshow I want to show you, and I will give you commentary as we go along. And the focus of this is going to be, of course, truth in the time of COVID-19. Okay? That sound okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. All right.
Absolutely.
Let me share my screen with you, and we'll get rolling. Okay. All right. Let me see if I can do this right. There we go. All right. If you're not getting the illusion, I think all of you are. I'm stealing it from Marquez, who wrote a book called Love in the Time of Cholera.
Yes.
That's why I came up with the title. Okay. So I want to talk about what's going on with the epidemic. And then from there, I want to provide you with a little bit of commentary along the way. Okay. For those of you who maybe have not had the pleasure, this is a skyline of New York City, which, no offense to Washington, D.C., this is the capital of the country. This is the capital of the universe. This is where capitalization begins, laissez-faire, free trade, all those things. This is the financial capital of the United States and, frankly, of the globe. But underneath, something lies underneath that is, by the way, that's Los Angeles. I wanted to make sure I had both coasts represented, okay? And what we have right now is the leadership is centered in Washington, D.C., and it's centered in Washington, D.C. by the president. And that doesn't matter whether it's Trump or Obama or Clinton or anybody who succeeds him or precedes him. But what I want to talk about is about the difference between official sources and authoritative sources, because that often is where there's a tremendous conflict when it comes to information. That is when official sources try to pretend to be authoritative sources, or worse, when the official sources are perceived to be authoritative sources. And that can happen often, and it's happening right now. It's been happening a lot of late, but it's especially happening right now in the schism that is dividing this country. This is the president, the most official source we have in the land. And this gentleman with his hands up toward the bottom of the screen, this is the White House press room, by the way. This is Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is not only an official source, but probably among the most authoritative sources right now in the country. What I mean by that is that this man possesses a medical degree. He was in the fight to root out AIDS when the AIDS epidemic happened in the 80s. He has a very long history of battling infectious diseases. He's the head of the NIH, the National Institute of Health. He is, without question, among the most authoritative sources that we have in the land right now. And he, like Walter Cronkite many, many years ago, this guy's probably the most trusted man in America. And I'll give you an example of that. Yesterday at the White House press conference where the coronavirus meeting took place, the president said that there is a chance that there will be no COVID-19 in the fall. Anybody catch that? Anybody hear that? President said that, okay?
I don't think I heard that.
Yeah, he said that during the news conference, okay?
Okay.
Moments later, Fauci came up and spoke, and he said, and I think I'm quoting him directly, he said, COVID-19 will be with us in the fall. Completely contradicting the president, okay? This is where you, as a citizen of America and someone who digests news, you got to make up your own mind. Who is it you want to believe? I'm not going to tell you who to believe. That's entirely up to you as a consumer of news and as a citizen of the United States. But what I can tell you is that this gentleman has an MD at the end of his name, and the president does not. The president has a very hopeful strategy, a very hopeful outlook for a number of reasons. He wants the best for the country. Let's be honest, he does. He also wants the best for the country because he's got a vested interest. We're in an election year. Statistically speaking, right now, he's doing very poorly. And what I mean by that is this. In the last presidential administrations, in the last 9 administrations, during a recession up for re-election, the president lost re-election 7 of those times. I am confident I'm not the only person that has this statistic in my back pocket, okay? So this hopeful outlook, well, hope is not a tragedy. Strategy, forgive me. And so Fauci often speaks very candidly, sometimes to the chagrin of the White House. But again, it is up to you to determine who it is that you care to believe as a consumer of the news. I will leave that up to you. But again, dissect who you believe is official and who you believe is authoritative, okay? This gentleman is the governor. Andrew Cuomo is the governor of New York. He has the most populous city in America in his purview, this one. And he has been battling in the biggest way in America, the COVID-19 virus, okay? By the way, if you're curious where the word COVID came from, the C does not stand for Chinese. COVID, the CO stands for corona. The VI stands for virus, and the D stands for disease, COVID-19. Can anybody guess what the 19 represents?
2019. 2019, I think.
Precisely, Sarah. It is the year that the virus was discovered. That's exactly right. So anybody wants to tell you otherwise, tell them you heard it here, okay? Back to Andrew Cuomo. In the state of New York, or in the city of New York, they've had about 15,000 deaths just in that one city. He does not have an MD at the end of his name, but for me, he has an authoritative sense of what is taking place. He also speaks incredibly candidly. And if there's bad news to share, he is the first to share it, and he bears no bones sharing it. He does it with regret and sadness at times, but he doesn't mince words. That is why a lot of people right now are trying to draft him for higher office at some point. If you haven't watched his news conferences, they're typically at about 10 in the morning our time. Catch one and see what you think. Make your own evaluation as to whether you believe he is simply an official or he is speaking also as an authoritative person regarding what his state is up against. It's very interesting to hear him speak and to contrast that with the president, and then to try to figure out where the truth lies. Is it in the middle, or does it sway to one side or the other? Again, you as a consumer of the news have to figure that out. And the reason that this is so important is because of this. This is what's taking place in American cities. El Paso is not immune, although it is blessed. I think we have about 500 cases in El Paso and 10 deaths as of this morning. But nationally, the figure is far higher. In fact, the US government has helped out New York by deploying this naval hospital ship called the USS Comfort. It initially was going to be used strictly for taking care of non-virus patients, but the hospitals, the land hospitals, are so overwhelmed that they got permission to send virus patients to this hospital. So it is now being used as well. Here are some stats for you. As of this morning, according to Johns Hopkins University, this is a non-governmental entity, so I have a lot of faith in what they report. There are 2.6 million global cases, 184,000 global deaths, 842,000 US cases, and 46,785 US deaths. there's a lot of chatter out there about how this compares to the seasonal flu. The flu is awful. It kills a ton of people every season. It kills about 100,000 people, according to the last figures I saw. I don't have those figures on my screen, but about 100,000 people. So some folks are clamoring that this is made up by the media. This is a hoax. It is over-exaggerated, etc. Let's try a little context here for a second. When was the first COVID virus case? It's about early March.
Was it in the U.S.?
Yes. First death was in early March. Okay. So in about 6 weeks, nearly 50,000 Americans have died. 6 weeks. So when people argue about their viewpoint regarding that this is exaggerated, that we're taking steps that are unnecessary, I'm not saying that the flu is not dangerous. It's hardly, in fact, I get a flu shot every year because I do consider it so dangerous. 6 weeks for the COVID virus, 6 weeks, okay? Consider that, okay? A thing in journalism that is always important is context. That's the context of this case, okay? More than 800,000 cases in the US in about 6-7 weeks' time.
Dino, I have a question for you.
Please.
So as a journalist, your job is to report the news. But how do you implement context? Because I guess like figures are context, but I kind of equate context to deeper meanings.
Right.
So how do you determine what is context when you're reporting the news?
Well, what I mean by that, Sarah, is that it's not just the raw numbers, it's the when that matters. It's the how that matters. Okay. Remember who, what, where, when, how, and why. And try to provide those answers to everything that you're dealing with, to every fact and figure you're providing. And that's why I said flu is dangerous as hell. The other day, Dr. Phil was on a news station and actually compared car wrecks to COVID-19 and said the car wrecks are far more dangerous. Okay, right? Are car wrecks contagious? And are there 48,000 deaths in a 6-week period? That's the context, Sarah.
Gotcha.
That's what I'm talking about.
Gotcha.
And frankly, this guy who does have I think he's got a PhD, not an MD, it was irresponsible of him to say that. Just irresponsible without providing the proper context, okay? Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor in Texas, said a couple of weeks ago and reiterated it yesterday that old people should sacrifice themselves for the sake of the economy, that it's okay. And you're welcome to look that up. It is such an egregious comment. I wouldn't doubt if you said he really didn't say that, but he did. And then he came down, he said that on Tucker Carlson, I think it was last week, and then he said it again yesterday. Old people, they should sacrifice themselves for the economy. It's okay if they die. And by the way, he fits in that age group. He's 70 something. Speaking of context.
That's so strange.
Wait, you said Tucker Carlson said it, or who said that?
He was on the Tucker Carlson TV show.
Oh, okay.
Yes, no. I don't believe Tucker said it. I think he asked the question, and that was the response by the lieutenant governor of Texas. So we're in a very strange time, and we're in a strange time, and this is happening. This is not fake news. This is real. There are real funerals with nobody being able to attend. There are real deaths taking place with people on FaceTime and on the phone saying goodbye to their loved ones. There are lots and lots of burial plots right now being devoted to people who die. These are not empty caskets. So for anybody who thinks that these are exaggerated, just ask the people who are in pain about the loss of their loved ones, okay? Any comments so far? Any questions?
It also reminds me of I don't know if it's the governor from from Las Vegas that also said that?
It was the mayor.
Oh, the
The
mayor?
mayor said something different. The Las Vegas governor is very conservative with respect to opening up the state. The Las Vegas mayor was on TV yesterday and was asked very specifically, what guidance are you providing the casinos, for example, about as they open up? Are you suggesting people be 6 feet apart? And her response, among many responses, was very simply, that's up to them. It's up to them. Whatever they want to do. She had no guidance to provide. Had none. So we're in a strange time. Now, in the same time, people, governors, mayors are getting very itchy about opening up their places for business. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back. Okay, folks, forgive me. I'm sorry to take a break. Hold on.
That's okay.
Yeah, in Denver, well, you've seen the news, haven't you? The protesters going against the healthcare workers wanting to barge
Yeah.
in. You know, I don't understand the mentality there. Don't they want to
Admittedly, I
live?
haven't watched a lot of the news or heard a lot of news lately, but I have seen those pictures.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to force myself not to look at the news because it's really disturbing what's happening right now.
I think part of the sentiment that they're trying to share is that a lot of them are business owners that can't file unemployment because they are business owners in a way and they can't feed themselves. So they're frustrated, I think.
Yeah, I can completely understand that, Kaylee, but I don't understand those folks that are getting on TV and saying, I want to go down the street to get a haircut, or I just want to have a hamburger.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I just don't get that.
Forgive me, I'm back. Okay, so the mayor of Fort Lauderdale, a couple of days ago, I think it was on Sunday, opened up the beaches in Fort Lauderdale. Like I said, people are just itching to get back to normality. Now, Florida has a lot of cases. They got a lot of cases, and the president's task force recommended that states begin to open up when they have 2 weeks of the curve starting to go downward. Remember how we talked about everybody was talking about the incline in the number of cases and then a plateau? So what the president's committee on the coronavirus has said is that states can begin to open up once they have 2 weeks of declining number of cases. Does everybody remember that? Okay. Mayor of Fort Lauderdale opened up the beaches on Sunday. These are pictures of Fort Lauderdale from Sunday. No masks or few. People having fun, which is fantastic, but that's where we are. People are not practicing the recommendations by the president's task force, nor is the mayor. The task force said, once you have 2 weeks of declining numbers, have at it. Okay, that isn't the case. So this is what's taking place. And what is occurring? Well, pig farms are starting to close. This is in Iowa, I believe. If I'm wrong, forgive me. I think it's in Iowa. At this one plant called Smithville, I think. Probably got the name wrong. I'm sorry. But there's this plant that had 200 workers who tested positive for coronavirus. Pork production is stopped completely at this place. They could no longer work because so many people were getting sick. Smithfield. So people were getting sick. So business owners are not producing product that people are not buying. There is a lot of apprehension, a lot of unemployment. New unemployment figures came out today. 4.4 million Americans filed for unemployment from last week to this week for a total of 22 million, I believe.
Whoa.
That mirrors the Great Depression. People are scared. Their economic livelihoods are in danger. You know, the $1,200 we got per adult in a household, it ain't going to cut it. It just isn't going to cut it. And so people are really scared. They're nervous and they're reacting. And this is among the reaction. This was the rally over the weekend in Austin, where people showed up with arms, as you can see right here, with flags, and with a very angry attitude because they want Texas to reopen. And so the governor of Texas had already announced, by the way, last Friday, that he was going to reopen the state. Little by little, state parks opened, I think, on Monday. And other things will start opening in a phased-in process in the next week or so. Notice, by the way, no masks. No
That's what I was thinking.
None of that.
Mhm.
Okay. Some people just think that this is a hoax. They just do. Not a hoax. Not a hoax. Johns Hopkins University. And those numbers are being cited by the government every day. So if they believe the numbers are credible, I think we can as well as consumers of the news. It says Johns Hopkins University is like saying Harvard or Yale. They're in the same category. Okay. So how do you tell the truth? You dissect it. You try to figure it out. You try to watch Fox News and you try to watch CNN and NBC as well. And you try to figure out on your own what you think is true. But for me, the ultimate decider is, am I using my brain? Am I trying to determine who's authoritative in their comments? Or is it just somebody who is speaking who may be an official, but not necessarily authoritative? And that's the difference. You got to be mindful of that, okay? Who really knows the subject matter they're talking about, okay? Very angry people, very upset people about what's going on with the economy. We've been shut down, what now, about 5 weeks, 6 weeks? People are hurting.
Yeah, something like that.
People are hurting, you know? I don't think any of us are immune to that, and you can see it in their faces. Everybody's pissed, you know, I get it. But is it being done for their own good? And that's what you kind of got to figure out and get into a Facebook argument, because goodness knows there's a lot of that. There's a lot of Facebook arguing taking place right now, a lot of stuff on Twitter. A lot of angry people are expressing themselves, which I think is wonderful. But sometimes people can be misled. I'm not saying that everybody in this picture is misled, but I think sometimes people get the wrong information or they misinterpret it, or at least their interpretation is not the same interpretation as mine. And for the record, my interpretation of information is pretty much down the middle. I think Sarah already knows this. I don't vote in primaries. I don't vote for most elected officials because I never want to be accused of either being a Republican or a Democrat, or for that matter, conservative or liberal. It is important to me that our objectivity is sacred, and for a journalist, even more so. So when I present information, I try to present it with the best dissection of the information as possible. Now, I want to contrast something for you. This is Peru. Now, as bad as you think that we may have it here, this is what's taking place in Peru. What's happened there is that the government has taken some very draconian steps, which I have frankly applaud. But among those draconian steps are the shutdown of transportation. Okay. Now, Peru is a very agrarian country, except for the city center of Lima. Lima has about 8 million inhabitants, and a lot of those people are part of the unofficial economy. There are people who come from the rural areas and they come down to do household work. They sweep the streets, they do the gardens, they raise the kids, kind of like we have here a lot. But here's what's happened. Because nobody's accepting anybody to do work for them for fear of contacting the virus, all these people have no work. So they want to go back home. But there's no transportation. all the transportation in the country is shut down. Shut down. There's no trains, there's no buses, there's no planes, there's nothing. So here's a little context, to use Sarah's new favorite expression. Yeah, I get the fact these people are pissed. I get it completely. I get it. This is taking place in Peru. And they're doing it right. They're taking very drastic steps in order to make sure that the virus is contained. The number of cases there is reasonable, all things considered, because of the steps the government has taken. But it includes doing this. And these people are out on the street and on the roadway, and they got nowhere to get there except on foot. So that's a little context for you. Now, there is light at the end of the tunnel. So how do we do this? How do we figure all this out? You try to take in as many different news sources as possible and dissect the wheat from the chaff. This is Wuhan, China. This is the epicenter of where this thing began. This all started in Wuhan, China. They were shut down, and again, in a very draconian, very strict manner, for about 78 days. People are now back on the street. The factories have started up again. People are walking their dogs. They're walking their kids. Now, everything is still very limited. Everybody has to wear masks. I think they can only get out for an hour a day right now. But the point is, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And that's what I wanted to get across. And I've shown these pictures to my students as well, because this is bad. But 78 days later, you can see the joy and sadness at the same time of this woman, I presume a woman, who is hugging one of her friends because they now get out of the house. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. How do you dissect all this information? Some of it's just with your own eyes. It's not what you're told, but what you see. These are images in Wuhan, and they were taken just a couple of days ago. And there are people out on the street again. Okay? So there is light at the end of the tunnel. But we're led to believe that the tunnel needs to open up now. Hence, all this. I don't know. It's a personal decision about short-term pain versus long-term gain. But the epicenter of this virus is now opening up. And they had it pretty bad. And whatever the Japanese death count is, I am confident it's far higher. I don't have a lot of faith in anything official that comes out of the Chinese government, nor I think we should. But the bottom line is that the pictures tell the story. So there are people. But again, how do we tell the truth? Get as many different news sources as you can. Figure out what is logical, what makes sense, what sounds right, and listen to authoritative sources and see what they tell you, and see if when you listen to that, does it sound plausible? Does it sound reasonable when El Paso's curve is still on the upswing for barbershops to open? And not only that, but if the governor says the barbershops are now open, is that something that you want to partake in? Okay? So as far as I know, even though the parks are open, the state parks, no one's knocked on my door and said, get out of the house. I'm taking you to Tom Hayes Park. So you still have, at the end of the day, you still have a choice. You still have a choice, okay? And if you want to, watch a couple of news conferences by the coronavirus team on the afternoons. They're meeting just about daily. Watch that. Watch Cuomo in the mornings. He meets for about 30 minutes, maybe an hour with everybody and updates everybody. Watch them both. Watch the contrast. See what makes sense, what's logical. Watch the analysis on Fox News of the president's news conference one day, and then watch the analysis on CNN another day. See what you like. See what makes sense. What's plausible. That's how you figure out what is the truth for you in this time of COVID-19. And hopefully we'll get back to this and we can go travel and visit. That would be a nice thing, wouldn't it? That would be good. But that's what I do, and that's how I try to figure out what it is that I'm going to believe and who I'm going to believe. Because it's not just about the what, but also about the who. So a lot of stuff I'm hearing, I'm discarding it after I evaluate it. And then the rest of it, well, it just goes away. And when somebody like this guy speaks, I'm probably going to take his word more than I'm going to take anybody else's. Okay? And I find it interesting that he, despite being on the virus committee, he's not there every day. That raises questions for me. Why isn't he there? He was there yesterday, but he wasn't there since Saturday. His viewpoints are often contrasting the official lines. Like I said, what happened yesterday? President says we may not have COVID-19 in the fall. This guy speaks 30 seconds later, it'll be with us in the fall. No doubt. Again, it's for you to dissect who you're going to believe and what you think makes sense. So use your noggin, evaluate it, see what you think.
Question for you, Dino.
Please.
Do you or have you noticed any news outlets that are most often reliable or anything like that? Is there maybe a journal or a newspaper that
I'll tell you the ones that I most often, the ones I digest, because they have a long track record with me of telling the truth. And just as importantly, when they make a mistake, of owning up to it and correcting it. Because that's just as critical, okay? I trust the New York Times. I trust the Wall Street Journal. I trust the LA Times. I trust the El Paso Times. I used to work there. Those people are solid. They're solid. If they make a mistake, they'll admit it, they'll own up to it, and we move on. In terms of broadcast, I trust CNN implicitly. I watch some Fox News and I watch some MSNBC, but I think that those two guys are on polar opposites. I think for the most part, CNN is about as down the middle as you can get. And when I'm talking about evaluating news, I'm talking about the news coverage, not necessarily their commentators. And please understand that there's a distinction, okay? Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, all those guys on Fox, they're not news people, they're commentators. The sad part is that they are viewed as news people. They aren't that. Rush Limbaugh, hell, he's an entertainer. He's the farthest thing that can be from a journalist. But a lot of people perceive him to be a journalist. There's some people on MSNBC who I think are incredibly smart, but their viewpoint is a lot more liberal than mine. I try to be as down the middle as possible, Sarah. And if there's something CNN reports that I don't believe, fine. But understand that the role of news is to challenge everything they hear and want it verified. There's an old saying about journalists, and that is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. Think about that for a second. Our job is to challenge the president every time he says, you will not have COVID-19 in the fall. And so somebody asked him, why do you know that? How do you know that? He had no answer. His response was, well, some viruses react and go away in the spring or in the summer. Okay, but what about the fall, Mr. President? How do you know this? He had no answer. Again, he doesn't have an MD. Now, periodically, he will acknowledge he has no MD, but he still makes medical assertions, acknowledging at the same time he has no medical degree. For example, he was really pushing hydroxychloroquine a couple of weeks ago. It's very interesting how he has stopped pushing that drug. He even said, "What have you got to lose?" And that is a direct quote. What you got to lose with this, some studies came out, and it's very harmful to people's hearts. So people are already in a very weakened state if they have COVID-19, and then you give them a drug that has a side effect, heart problems, well, they're going to die. And that's what a study said just this morning. Interestingly enough, neither the president nor Fox News, which had been pushing this drug, has been pushing it anymore. It's hardly mentioned at all anymore. I find that fascinating. Early on, when the president was pushing it, everybody was asking, what evidence do you have that this is beneficial for people who are suffering from the virus? There was never a response. And when the doctors were put up to say their response, well, there's some anecdotal evidence, but no studies yet. There's an old saying in journalism that if your mother tells you it's raining, step outside and look. So let's step outside and look. Ask for the evidence at all times. Ask to see the proof. And if there's no proof, then say there's no proof. That's a long-winded answer to your question, Sarah.
No, it's okay. Thank you so much.
Other questions or comments? Digest everything, evaluate it, separate it. Those are things that I do when it comes to my digestion of news, okay?
Would these principles apply, because I'm taking note of the photos that you showed us.
Yeah.
These same principles would apply to photojournalism as well?
I agree completely. But the reason I showed them to you, Sarah, is that every one of these photos is from the Associated Press, probably the most trusted news organization on the globe. Every one of this is an AP photo. Nothing's doctored, nothing's edited that shouldn't be edited, you know, etc. That's why I trust these photos, but yes, they should apply. Be just as skeptical. You know, Photoshop is a very powerful tool, and sometimes it falls in the wrong hands. But no, I am eminently comfortable with everything that I've shown you here because of the source that provided them. Okay, everything here is from the Associated Press. And if they said this is a photo from Sunday, Fort Lauderdale, I'm going to believe them. And if it's not, they're going to correct it right away. I used to work for them too, and they're incredibly respectful of being truthful and honest. Ethics are the most important thing to the Associated Press. If they can't verify it, they don't say it. It's just that simple. They don't say it, they don't use it.
Yeah. Something I learned in your classes, Dino, was the importance of being concise when writing news stories.
Yeah.
You can touch on that a little bit.
Yeah,
I
sure.
don't know, in my opinion, being concise is very hard, but also very important.
Probably something I wasn't today. Being concise, it's like this. Let's say we're back on campus and you have an afternoon class. And in the morning, you witness a car wreck. And at noon, you go to lunch and at Chipotle's, there's a fire. And when you come back from the fire, you get a really good parking space in the Sunbowl garage. When you get home to see your significant other, is the first thing out of your mouth when you says, how was your day? Is it going to be, well, I got this great parking spot? Or will it be about the fire where 3 people died?
The fire.
Exactly. And then you'll probably talk about, you know, you'll eventually work your way to the parking space. But what I'm getting at is that it's a very natural thing for us to tell stories in terms of what's most important. When I instruct my students about writing their stories, I tell them to put what's most important, not only at the top of their story, but at the beginning of their sentence. So even within the sentence, to be evaluating what's the most important thing. So that's an important element. First of all, determine what matters. And once you determine what matters, Sarah, typically what falls in place very naturally is to write it in a concise manner. And I'll give you an example, okay? 3 cooks at Chipotle on North Mesa died Monday afternoon when the stove blew up in front of 1,000 customers, Common Police said. All the facts, who, what, where, when, how, and why, as best you can answer them. We typically speak in active voice, and we naturally interpret things in terms of what's the most important thing. Do that when you're writing. And we do it when we speak most of the time. We most of the time do it. Now, once in a while, you've got a friend who goes on and on and on, and finally, at the end of 6 minutes, gets to the meat. But those are rare. Most people get to what's important at the very beginning.
I'm guilty of that.
I haven't seen that, Sarah, at least never in my classes. So being concise and evaluating what is most important is what needs to be at the top of the story or at the top of whatever you're writing. Plus, it gets people's attention. You want to grab your reader by the throat. You as a writer, Sarah, have one goal in mind, and that goal is, I want to be read. Is it not?
Right, yeah.
You don't want to write for yourself. You want to write so people read you, digest you, think about it, talk about it at lunch the next day. That's what you want as a writer. Grab them by the throat. Even the best fiction writers follow this example. They put the most important thing at the very beginning. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. That quote's 150 years old, and people still know it. Okay?
Thanks
Grab
so
you
much.
by the throat. Other questions? Okay.
Just a comment.
Sure.
Dino, I just, listening to you saying that you worked with the El Paso Times and the Associated Press, sounds like you've had a very interesting career in journalism.
I'd like to think so. Yeah, I've worked in a lot of places.
Nice.
Yeah.
What made you want to go into journalism?
I want to change the world. Give me
Yeah.
another 30 seconds. I'll explain that. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay. Here's the reason why in high school I decided to be a journalist. So I had a very good friend named Becky, and Becky came from one of the 3 feeder schools that fed into El Paso High, which were Mesita, Lamar, and Vilas. And if you think of the demographics of those schools, Mesita, middle class to upper class on average. Lamar, lower middle class, but still middle class. Vilas, mostly poor, heavily Hispanic, sociologically not doing so well, etc. Those are the 3 feeder schools, okay? So Becky and I became very good friends, and one day Becky and I were talking, and she had, I can't go to have pizza today. I have a meeting with my White Tweens organization. What the hell's a White Tweens? Anyway, it was an organization affiliated with the YMCA or the YWCA. And I said, that sounds really great. Tell me more about it. And she started rattling off some of the people in the group, and I recognized some of the names. And then I realized, Becky, are all the girls from Mesita? No, there's one girl from Lamar. And no girls from Vilas. Yet this was an El Paso high school sponsored organization. So demographically speaking, not only were all the girls middle to upper middle class, for the most part, there were no Hispanics. I think there were 2 total at El Paso High, mind you. And I thought, there's something really wrong with this picture. And what was even more wrong is that Becky didn't see what I saw. And that really bugged me. Now, I don't think it should be 30, 30, 30, or 33, 33, and 33%. That's unreasonable. But there's nobody from Vivus who could join this organization, and only one from Lamar. And she got in because she was a cheerleader. So I thought, this doesn't sound right to me. Okay. So I was on the staff of the yearbook at El Paso High. And not the yearbook, I'm sorry, the newspaper. I want to write about this. So I wrote about it. And it changed. They opened up the membership, as well they should. And the membership became never equitable, but it became more reasonable. And so to a great degree, Becky is one of the reasons I got into journalism. I had always had an interest in it, but when I heard about this and I recognized, at least by my perception, what I thought was very unjust, I wrote about it. And it changed. And I realized that journalism is a great equalizer in society, or at least it can be, when it's not abused, when it's properly used. And I thought, okay, all right, so let's do journalism. And so I decided to do journalism. And I'm very happy I did. I started at the El Paso Herald-Post, which was an afternoon paper when I was in my 20s. I started there. I worked at the Austin American-Statesman for a while. I then went to the San Antonio Express News. I worked for a paper in Hong Kong for a while, and I got to see what that was like because it was under British rule at the time, prior to the transition to Chinese rule. I also worked at the Tucson Citizen. I worked at the Associated Press, and I worked at the El Paso Times, and now I'm doing this, and I'm having a blast. So this is what I'm doing now, and I'm enjoying it. I'm in my 6th year now of teaching, and I'm enjoying it a lot. I enjoy it immensely. I'm very fortunate to do this.
That is just wonderful.
Well, I'd like to think it is. I moved around a bit, although I look nomadic, but I really am not. I'm very much a stay-at-home kind of person. But the opportunities arose that I just couldn't pass up. When I got a call to work at the AP, how do you turn that down? You can't turn down the Associated Press, or a chance to go to Hong Kong. My boss said, hey, we want to send you to Hong Kong. You got a week to respond. So it'll take an hour. I'm going. See ya. So I've been very fortunate. I've been very lucky.
Yes.
Been very lucky.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Of course. And I try to not only share this story with my students, but to tell them that even in today's more limited media landscape, it's still possible to do this. But they have to be willing to leave the bubble. And I wanted to leave the bubble. And so it became easy for me to get a chance to go work somewhere else. I spent 24 and a half years in El Paso, loved every one of them, but when it was time to go, it was time to go. So I left. And now I came back 30 years later. Other questions, folks? Let's see. There we go. Okay. Other comments, complaints?
Dino, you forgot to mention that you're a really good photographer.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. I teach photography as well as news writing, and I got a good handle on it. I do okay. Thank you, Sarah. You're very kind. But yes, I make sure. One of the things that I think is important in a university setting is that as best you can to have practiced the craft that you are teaching. I have taught my students how to cover autopsy stories, how to write about police stories, how to read an FBI report, because I've done those things. Now, it's not to say that you can't teach those things without having done them, but I think there's an added level of credibility if you have done those things. I think that's important. It's important when a student says, have you? And I can say, yes, I have. You can Google my pictures, and I got a ton of pictures all over the internet, especially at former employers. That's cool.
That is.
I can say with some level of confidence that, yeah, I've done, time-lapse photography. I've done those things. That was important. I don't want to sound like I'm just teaching something that I haven't done. Again, nothing wrong with that, but I just feel it adds a little extra layer of credibility if you can.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's like trying to teach medicine and never having been an ER nurse or an ER doctor. You know, come on. Other questions, folks? Comments?
Just that I really enjoyed this. I hope everyone else did. Very
Same here.
informative. Yeah.
Me
Well, you
too.
guys are
Thank
incredibly
you.
kind.
Absolutely.
You're kind. And I hope I didn't let political views get in, because I try to avoid political views, but I do try to give you information about politicians. That I try to do. Okay?
I think the information you gave us is really good, considering some of us are not watching the news. And I've always seen you as a very down the middle guy, so I respect.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I try to live that way, and I mean that sincerely.
Yeah, definitely.
I do. I try to evaluate everything and figure out what makes sense, what's logical, and go from there. You know, if the doctor in charge of infectious diseases says we're going to have COVID-19 in the fall, I'm probably going to believe that guy. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably so. So, is there anything else I can tell you? Anything else I can help you with?
I can't think of anything else.
Okay. All right. With that, folks, I guess I'll sign off.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, folks. Sarah, what I will do is that since I recorded the session, I'll
Okay.
put it in a Google Drive folder. I'll
Uh-huh.
send you the link, and you can do with it as you wish. How does that sound?
Perfect. Yeah. So that way people who couldn't make it will be able to.
There you go. I'll be happy to do that for you, okay?
Thank you, Dino.
Thank you.
Folks, thank you so much for the invite. I enjoyed it very much. You're very kind to have allowed me to do this.
Of
And if I
course.
can ever be of assistance again, let me know.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank
Do you
you.
have any
Thank you
other
so much.
workshops that, or like any other skills you would like to share with us? Just let me know, and we're here. You know.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much. I think that what you're doing is a great cause. And to be able to help women, younger, older, whatever age, I think is a wonderful task. And I'm on board with that. I'm the
Thank
product
you.
of a single mom, and I'm all over that if I can help.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you, folks.
Thank
We'll see you
you.
later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.